Now, for more on the cooperation between China and Germany on climate change, we're joined by Yixiang Xu. He's with New Research Initiative Fellow at the American Institute for Contemporary German Studies at Johns Hopkins, right here in Washington, D.C. Xu, thanks very much for joining us. Let's first talk about this partnership that we have seen forge, Germany and China move forward. Do you expect other countries are ready to join that tandem and kind of just push the United States aside and say, this is a global crisis and we have to deal with it now?
I think, obviously China is taking up a much bigger role since the United States has pulled out of the Paris Climate Accord. The question right now is, Germany and China are forging a closer relationship and working relationship on climate change and combating climate change. And will other countries follow suit? I mean, I think the short answer is, when you're looking at the options on the table, China definitely is a great presence. It's taking up a lot of responsibilities. But on the other hand, this is a huge challenge for China as well, because from this point on, you're not just looking at China demonstrating what it did domestically to combat climate change, and you have to then take into consideration its global reach. Can it rally other countries to stand with it and fight for a common climate agenda? And the United States obviously is still going to be a big part of the picture.
Right.
And you cannot have a functional global climate agenda without the participation of the United States. So that is still a very front and center.
Well, let's talk about what China is doing, and do you think it could, I don't want to use the term shame the U.S. into acting, but if you look about in terms of alternative energy, wind, solar power, China is leading the world. President Xi has been very effective in putting together groups. He and Barack Obama arguably were the two leaders that pushed through the Paris Climate Accord. Where do we go from here? How important is China going to be moving forward?
I think China, first, it demonstrated its great commitment to its own domestic climate agenda, and it has demonstrated great capacity and appetite to adopting green technologies to fight climate change. And I think going forward, China is going to have a very front seat in the increasingly growing green technology market all over the world. And you would probably see a more active engagement from China in other parts of the world, including Chinese investment in Chinese aid.
Let's talk about the private investment, because here, with this president whose mantra has been "Make America Great Again," looking to coal and other fossil fuels, whose time has arguably come and gone, the jobs are in new technology, where a lot of economists are arguing right now. Is that going to position China very well, and how's that going to affect the bilateral relationship between the United States and China?
I think, the fundamentals of economics have basically confirmed that going forward in the long term, green technology, renewable energy is the way to go. It's going to be more efficient. It's going to bring more benefits. And it's the actual, the market that is, phasing out the traditional fuel sources. In terms of bilateral U.S.-China relationship, I think, the bilateral relationship itself is based on very solid economic foundations. And as we see market forces come into play and actively shift the focus from traditional fossil fuels towards more renewable and green technologies, that itself would push, I think, the dialogue into another direction.
Let's talk about what will really headline the talks going on in Germany right now. Talking about oceans, talking about the Arctic. What areas do you think are going to be focused on? Of course, you have to talk about the emissions into the air as well, greenhouse gases.
Right. I think in terms of climate change, it is obviously a very sort of top priority for the German G20 presidency and front and center for them. But at the same time, there are so many top agenda items right now, including the North Korea nuclear program. That grabs so much attention from all the leaders participating. And at the same time, we already saw coming from the working draft of the joint statement that this language on climate change has already been significantly weakened to, in a way, accommodate the U.S. sentiment, the current administration's sentiment towards climate change. So I think while, like the Chinese and German joint declaration, of their joint commitment to combating climate change, I think is probably not going to be a very top priority.
Which is going to disappoint a lot of people, because a lot of people say it is the pressing issue, and President Xi has made it one of these cornerstones of his presidency. Do you think, however, though, Angela Merkel, very powerful leader, President Xi, very dynamic individual as well, they're going to get behind closed doors and try to twist arms and say, look, you have to get back with this. It's imperative that the United States, traditionally the worst polluter over the last 100 years, the #2 emitter of greenhouse gases right now. I know there are a lot of global issues, but this can't be ignored.
Of course, I think it's a shared sense with all G20 leaders at this point that you have to come out with a positive statement about combating global climate change. And I think that will actually be part of the final statement. But at the same time, I think the scope of the communication is probably going to be limited to, let's focus on the impact of climate change and how to do that, and maybe talk about the measures and how to deal with it specifically in the future.
Yixiang Xu, thank you very much. We appreciate your insights.
My pleasure.